The stagecoach rattled to a halt, sending a cloud of dust billowing across the desolate Montana landscape as Zelda Morgan clutched her single valise with white knuckles. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading for the entirety of the 3-week journey from Boston. A journey that had given her far too much time to reconsider the rash decision that had brought her to this God-forsaken territory in 1875. Last stop, Silver Creek, the driver called out, his voice rough from years of shouting over thundering hooves and creaking wagon wheels. Zelda didn't move. The other passengers, a salesman and an elderly couple, gathered their belongings and descended. Still, she remained frozen, staring through the small window at the ramshackle town that stretched before her. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, most appearing to have been constructed with more haste than skill. This was to be her home. This was where her husband awaited. "Miss, this is your stop," the driver said, peering in at her with impatience written across his weathered face. "I know," Zelda whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, gathering what little courage remained, she stepped down onto the dusty ground. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. She adjusted her bonnet, grateful for the small protection it offered, and took in her surroundings. A handful of horses were hitched outside what appeared to be a saloon from which raucous laughter escaped. A general store sat across the way, its windows displaying goods that even from this distance seemed worn and limited. Zelda Morgan, the deep voice startled her. Turning, she found herself looking up quite a way up at a tall man with broad shoulders. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wasn't dressed like the gentlemen of Boston with their fine suits and polished shoes. Instead, he wore practical clothing denim trousers, a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal forearms tanned by outdoor work, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "Mr. Nash Williams?" she asked, attempting to keep her voice steady. He nodded once, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Madam, welcome to Silver Creek." His eyes moved over her face, and something in his expression softened momentarily before he cleared his throat. "Let me take your bag." Before she could protest, he had lifted the valise from her grip. His fingers accidentally brushed against hers, and she pulled back as if burned. "I'll take you to the boarding house," he said, seemingly unbothered by her reaction. "Figured you'd want to rest before." He trailed off, evidently not wishing to mention the wedding that was supposedly taking place the next day. "Mr. Williams," Zelda began, her voice stronger than she felt. "I believe we need to discuss the roads a bit rough," he interrupted, nodding toward the main street. "Watch your step." Frustration welled within her. The man was deliberately avoiding the conversation she needed to have. They walked in uncomfortable silence, Zelda acutely aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. News of the mail-order bride's arrival had clearly spread. The boarding house turned out to be a modest 2-story building with a small porch adorned with 2 rocking chairs. A handwritten sign declared it, "Mrs. Holloway's Boarding House Clean Rooms, Fair Prices." Nash led her inside, where they were greeted by a plump woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "This must be your bride-to-be," the woman exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron before extending one to Zelda. "I'm Mabel Holloway." "It's so nice to have a new face in town, especially one as pretty as yours." Zelda managed a polite smile, shaking the woman's hand. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Holloway. I've prepared our best room for you, dear," Nash here insisted. Nash shuffled uncomfortably at this revelation. "Mrs. Holloway, would you mind if I had a few minutes to speak with Miss Morgan before she settles in?" The older woman's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Of course, I'll just go put on some tea." She disappeared through a doorway that presumably led to the kitchen. Nash gestured toward a small sitting area near the window. "May we?" Zelda nodded, following him to the pair of worn armchairs. She sat rigidly, hands folded in her lap as he placed her valise on the floor beside her. "Mr. Williams," she began again, determined not to be sidetracked. "I must speak frankly." "Nash," he corrected. "If we're to be married tomorrow, I reckon you should call me Nash. That's precisely what I wish to discuss." Zelda took a deep breath. I cannot marry you." His expression remained curiously unchanged, as if he'd been expecting this. "May I ask why? Was it something in my letters that misled you?" In truth, his letters had been what convinced her to accept his proposal in the first place. Unlike the other respondents to her advertisement, Nash Williams had written with sincerity and intelligence. He described his ranch, his hopes for the future, his desire for companionship rather than just a housekeeper or someone to warm his bed. He'd seemed decent, honorable even. "No, your letters were." She hesitated. "They were lovely. But I've had time to reflect during my journey, and I've realized I cannot bind myself to a stranger in a place so far from everything I've known." Nash leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I understand this is overwhelming. Silver Creek isn't Boston, and I'm not asking you to decide right this minute. Rest tonight, meet some folks tomorrow, see the town in proper daylight." "Mr. Williams, Nash, you don't understand. I intend to return east on the next stagecoach." Zelda twisted her fingers together nervously. "I've made a terrible mistake." A flicker of disappointment crossed his features. "The next coach east doesn't come through for 2 weeks. 2 weeks." The words came out as a whisper of dismay. "Silver Creek isn't exactly a bustling metropolis," he said with a hint of wry humor. "But it means you have time to be sure about your decision." Zelda's mind raced. 2 weeks in this town? With this man she'd nearly married, with all these people who were expecting a wedding. "I'll pay for your return ticket," Nash continued. "If after 2 weeks you still wish to leave, I won't stand in your way." The generosity of his offer caught her off guard. "That's very kind, but all I ask is that you don't make your final decision today. Will you at least consider that?" There was something in his eyes, not desperation or anger, but a quiet hope that made her hesitate. What harm would there be in waiting? The stagecoach wouldn't come any sooner regardless. "Very well," she conceded. 2 weeks. Nash's smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek that his letters certainly hadn't mentioned. "Thank you, Miss Morgan." "Zelda," she corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the familiarity. His smile widened. "Zelda, Mrs." Holloway returned with a tray of tea and biscuits, and Nash stood. "I'll leave you to get settled. I have a few things to attend to at the ranch, but I'll come by tomorrow morning if that's agreeable." Zelda nodded, uncertain what else to say. After Nash departed, Mrs. Holloway showed Zelda to her room, a small but clean space with a comfortable-looking bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the main street, offering a view of the mountains in the distance. "He's a good man, you know," Mrs. Holloway said as she placed fresh towels on the dresser. "One of the best in these parts." "I'm sure he is," Zelda replied noncommittally. "Been through a lot, too. Lost his parents to fever when he was just 17. Built that ranch up from nearly nothing." The older woman paused at the door. Not many would have taken in his sister's children the way he did when she passed. This was news to Zelda. "Children?" Tommy and Lily, 9 and 6 now, sweet as can be. Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing look. "He didn't mention them in his letters, did he?" Zelda shook her head, stunned. "That's Nash for you. Probably thought it might scare you off. Man's raising those children alone, running that ranch. Hasn't had an easy time of it." With that parting information, Mrs. Holloway left, closing the door softly behind her. Zelda sank onto the edge of the bed, mind reeling. Children. Nash was raising 2 children, a detail he'd conveniently omitted from their correspondence. The revelation should have reinforced her decision to leave. She'd come here to be a wife, not an instant mother. Yet instead, she found herself curious. What kind of man took in orphaned children? What kind of man worked a ranch alone while raising a family as darkness fell? Zelda unpacked her meager belongings and prepared for bed. Her thoughts still tangled with questions about Nash Williams and the life he'd built here in Silver Creek. Morning came with startling brightness, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. Zelda dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself it was merely to make a good impression on the townspeople she'd meet, not for Nash's benefit. After a hearty breakfast provided by Mrs. Holloway, Zelda found herself sitting on the porch, awaiting Nash's arrival. She didn't have to wait long. Just as the town was coming to life, with shopkeepers opening their doors and horses and wagons beginning to traverse the main street. She spotted him approaching on horseback. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. But what caught Zelda's attention was the small figure seated in front of him, a little girl with blonde pigtails, clutching the saddle horn with determined concentration. Nash dismounted gracefully, then lifted the child down. Taking her by the hand, he approached the boarding house. Only then did Zelda notice the boy trailing slightly behind them, his expression guarded as he studied her. "Good morning," Nash called out as they reached the porch steps. "Hope you slept well." Zelda nodded, her gaze drawn to the children. "I did, thank you," Nash cleared his throat. "Zelda, I'd like you to meet Lily and Tommy, my niece and nephew." The little girl Lily regarded Zelda with unabashed curiosity. "Are you really from Boston? Tommy says Boston folks talk funny." "Lily," Nash admonished gently, but Zelda found herself smiling. "I am from Boston," she confirmed, "and perhaps we do talk a bit differently than people out here." Tommy remained silent, his eyes the same striking blue as Nash's, assessing her with a wariness that spoke of past disappointments. "We thought we might show you around town," Nash said. "If you're feeling up to it." The sincerity in his voice made declining difficult. Besides, she reasoned, she needed to know more about Silver Creek if she was to be stranded here for 2 weeks. "I'd like that," she replied, rising from the rocking chair. What followed was a tour unlike any Zelda could have imagined. Silver Creek, it turned out, was more than the dusty collection of buildings she'd initially perceived. Nash introduced her to the townspeople, the blacksmith, whose wife made the best apple pies in the territory, the school teacher who doubled as the town's only doctor, the gruff shopkeeper who slipped candy to Lily while pretending not to notice. Tommy gradually warmed to her, especially when she expressed genuine interest in his description of the local wildlife. By midday, he was walking beside her, pointing out landmarks with the authority of someone much older than his 9 years. "And that's where the stagecoach nearly tipped over last winter," he explained, indicating a bend in the road. "Uncle Nash had to ride out with Mr. Peterson to help pull it upright again." "That must have been quite the sight," Zelda replied, glancing at Nash, who walked ahead with Lily perched on his shoulders. "Uncle Nash says a man's duty is to help when help's needed," Tommy stated matter-of-factly, "even if it's inconvenient." The simple wisdom in the boy's words gave Zelda pause. She watched as Nash lowered Lily to the ground, his movements gentle despite his strength. The contradiction fascinated her, this rugged man with calloused hands who handled children with such tenderness. They stopped for lunch at the small cafe attached to the general store, where Zelda was introduced to Western hospitality in the form of hearty stew and fresh baked bread. Throughout the meal, she found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn into the children's stories and Nash's quiet humor. "Would you like to see the ranch?" Nash asked as they finished eating. "It's not far, about a mile outside town." The invitation surprised her. She'd assumed they'd return to the boarding house after lunch, that Nash would continue his daily work. "I wouldn't want to impose," she began. "Please come," Lily interjected, her small face earnest. "You can meet my chickens. I name them all after flowers." How could anyone refuse such an invitation? "I'd be delighted to meet your chickens," Zelda said, and was rewarded with the child's beaming smile. The journey to the Williams ranch was made in a small wagon Nash had left at the livery stable. Lily insisted on sitting beside Zelda, while Tommy took the opportunity to pepper Nash with questions about the cattle herd. As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. It wasn't grand by any means, a modest wooden house with a wide porch, a sturdy barn, corrals for horses and cattle, and various outbuildings. But what struck Zelda was how well-maintained everything appeared. The house had been recently painted, the fence posts stood straight and even, and a small garden flourished alongside the main building. "It's not much," Nash said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment. "But the land's good. We've got a creek that runs year-round, and the valley provides natural shelter for the cattle in winter." "It's lovely," Zelda replied honestly, and it was. There was something deeply appealing about the practical beauty of the place, a stark contrast to the crowded, sooty streets of Boston. Upon arriving, Lily immediately dragged Zelda to see her precious chickens, each indeed named for a flower: rose, daisy, violet, and so on. Tommy proudly showed off his collection of interesting rocks and feathers displayed on a shelf in the room he shared with his sister. The house itself was simple but comfortable. Nash had clearly made efforts to create a proper home. There were curtains on the windows, braided rugs on the floors, and a bookshelf filled with volumes that surprised Zelda with their variety, from practical guides on ranching to classic literature. "The children need education," Nash explained when he caught her examining the books. "We're too far for them to attend school regularly in winter, so we make do here." As afternoon turned to evening, Zelda found herself in the kitchen, helping Nash prepare dinner while the children completed their daily chores. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on her. This was the life she would have stepped into had she gone through with the marriage. "You're good with them," Nash observed as they worked side by side. "The children, I mean," Zelda smiled, slicing potatoes with practiced efficiency. "I taught at a school in Boston for several years. Children are much the same everywhere, I think. Is that why you answered my advertisement?" To escape teaching, the directness of his question caught her off guard. "Partly," she admitted after a moment. "My position was becoming complicated." Nash raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "The headmaster's son developed an attachment to me," Zelda elaborated, keeping her voice low so the children wouldn't overhear. "His attentions became increasingly unwelcome, but his father refused to acknowledge the problem. It seemed prudent to remove myself from the situation." Nash's expression darkened. Man should have protected you, not his son's pride. The simple statement, delivered without fanfare, warmed something in Zelda's chest. "Why didn't you mention Tommy and Lily in your letters?" she asked, changing the subject. Nash's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "I thought about it many times, but I've had women respond to advertisements before, only to withdraw when they learned about the children." He glanced toward the window, where Tommy could be seen carrying firewood to the stack by the house. "I wanted someone to choose me first, I suppose. Selfish, maybe." "Not selfish," Zelda countered. "Human." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment, Zelda glimpsed vulnerability behind Nash's steady gaze. The moment was broken by Lily's arrival, proudly bearing a small basket of eggs for tomorrow's breakfast. Dinner was a lively affair, with Tommy recounting a tale of the time he'd spotted a mountain lion on the ridge above the ranch, and Lily interrupting frequently to add details he'd omitted. Nash mostly listened, his fond expression as he watched the children telling Zelda more about him than words ever could. As twilight descended, Nash hitched the wagon to take Zelda back to town. The children protested, begging her to stay longer to return tomorrow. "Miss Zelda has things to do in town," Nash told them gently. "But perhaps she'll visit again before she leaves." The reminder of her impending departure cast a shadow over the evening. During the ride back, Zelda found herself uncharacteristically quiet, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. "I apologize if the children were overwhelming," Nash said as they approached the boarding house. "They don't get many visitors." "They're wonderful," Zelda assured him. "You've done an admirable job raising them." Nash's hands tightened on the reins. "I do my best. They deserve better than life's dealt them so far." The simple statement, devoid of self-pity, touched something deep within Zelda. This man faced challenges she could scarcely imagine, yet he bore them with quiet dignity. As he helped her down from the wagon, his hand warm around hers, Zelda made a spontaneous decision. "Would it be possible for me to visit again tomorrow?" "I promised Lily I'd help her name the new chicks that hatched last week." The smile that spread across Nash's face was worth any uncertainty she felt. "We'd like that very much." The following days fell into an unexpected pattern. Zelda spent mornings in town, getting to know the people of Silver Creek, helping the schoolteacher organize books for the coming term, assisting Mrs. Holloway with baking, learning local history from the elderly postmaster who'd been among the town's first settlers. Afternoons were spent at the ranch. She taught Tommy and Lily reading and arithmetic, helped with chores, and gradually learned the rhythms of ranch life. Nash would often be working with the cattle or horses, but he made time to join them for late afternoon meals, his quiet presence becoming something Zelda found herself looking forward to more each day. She learned that Nash had a dry wit that emerged when he was comfortable. That he read poetry sometimes in the evenings after the children were asleep. That despite his capability with ranch work, he struggled with mending clothes and was secretly relieved when she offered to help. A week passed this way, the days slipping by with surprising speed. Zelda found herself thinking less and less about returning east, and more about the life unfolding before her in this remote corner of Montana territory. The turning point came unexpectedly. She was helping Nash mend a fence in the north pasture, the children nearby collecting wildflowers when dark clouds began rolling in from the mountains. "Storm's coming," Nash observed, straightening to study the sky. "We should head back." They gathered the children and tools quickly, but they'd barely started toward the house when the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain poured down in blinding sheets, and thunder crashed overhead with such force that Lily cried out in fear. Nash lifted the little girl into his arms and grabbed Tommy's hand. "This way," he shouted over the downpour, guiding Zelda toward a small structure she hadn't noticed before, a line shack used during cattle drives. Inside, it was sparse but dry: a small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Nash quickly built a fire in the stove while Zelda helped the children out of their soaked outer clothes. "Will we have to stay here all night?" Tommy asked, his earlier bravado replaced by the uncertainty of a child. "Just until the storm passes," Nash assured him, wrapping a blanket around the boy's shoulders. "The ranch isn't far, but that lightning makes it too dangerous to travel right now." Zelda found herself seated on the cot with Lily curled against her side, the child's small body trembling slightly with each thunderclap. Almost without thinking, she began to sing softly a lullaby her own mother had sung years ago. The simple melody seemed to calm not just Lily but everyone in the small space. Tommy gradually relaxed, settling onto a bedroll Nash had laid out near the stove. Even Nash himself, working quietly to prepare a simple meal from the provisions, seemed to move with the rhythm of her song. As the children drifted to sleep, lulled by warmth and Zelda's gentle voice, she found herself alone with Nash in the soft glow of the stove's light. "You're good with them," he said quietly, echoing his words from days earlier, but now with a depth of feeling that hadn't been there before. "They make it easy," she replied honestly. "They're remarkable children. They adore you." Nash's gaze held hers across the small space. "We all do." The simple statement hung in the air between them, its implications too significant to dismiss as mere politeness. "Nash," Zelda began, uncertain what she meant to say. "I know you plan to leave in a few days," he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "And I'll honor my promise to help you return east if that's what you truly want. But I need you to know what you'd be leaving behind." He moved to sit beside her on the cot, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Not just the ranch or Silver Creek, but us, a family. It might not be the life you imagined in Boston, but it would be real, and you would be cherished, Zelda. Every day." The earnestness in his voice caught at her heart. This wasn't the practiced charm of Boston suitors or the desperate plea of a lonely rancher. This was something far more profound, a man offering his heart with complete honesty. "I came west because I was running away," Zelda admitted. "From an uncomfortable situation, yes, but also from the feeling that my life had become a series of obligations without joy." She looked toward the sleeping children, Tommy's arm protectively draped over his sister even in slumber. "I never expected to find something worth running toward." Nash's hand found hers in the dim light, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Is that what we could be? Something worth running toward?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the small cabin, Zelda felt a clarity she'd been searching for her entire life. "Yes," she whispered, the single word carrying all the certainty she felt. "I think you are." The smile that transformed Nash's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then blindingly beautiful. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When the storm finally passed in the early hours of morning, they made their way back to the ranch house, the children sleepy but excited by their adventure. As the sun rose over the valley, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, Zelda stood on the porch and watched Nash leading the horses to water, his movements sure and strong in the morning light. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the comfortable Boston existence she'd once envisioned. It was something wilder, less predictable, infinitely more challenging, and yet somehow exactly right. 2 days later, when the stagecoach rumbled into Silver Creek, Zelda stood outside the general store with Nash and the children. But instead of boarding with a ticket east, she was there to mail letters, one to her sister explaining her decision to stay, and another to arrange for her remaining belongings to be sent west. The wedding took place the following Sunday. It wasn't grand by Boston standards, no elaborate cathedral or hundreds of guests. Instead, they exchanged vows in the small church on the edge of town, surrounded by the people of Silver Creek who had, in the span of mere weeks, become something like family. Lily scattered wildflower petals down the aisle with solemn concentration. Tommy stood proudly beside Nash, the ring-bearer's responsibilities weighing heavily on his young shoulders. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered townspeople carried all the genuine warmth that had been missing from Zelda's life in the East. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do. Hard winters when the snow piled high against the ranch house walls. Dry summers when they watched the sky anxiously for rain. The arrival of their own children, first a daughter with Nash's blue eyes and Zelda's determined spirit, then a son whose laughter could light up the darkest day. But through it all, Zelda never once regretted the decision made in that lined shack during a thunderstorm. Each morning, waking beside Nash, watching the sun rise over the land that had become truly home, she knew she'd found what so many spend their lives searching for: not just love, but purpose. A place to belong, a life worth living with all its complications and joys. And on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the work was done, she and Nash would sometimes sit on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, and marvel at how close they'd come to missing this. How a mail-order bride who nearly backed out at the last minute and a cowboy who took a chance had somehow found their way to a love that was, indeed, the greatest reward of all.